to buy the materials. That's as much as I needed. I thought I was doing a cartoon until I saw that first really rough cut. I was like, oh my God, it's great.
I would get what the studio would
Paul
consider to be the
Simon.
oddball project, something that didn't really fit into the traditional kind of generic frame.
Works for
And
Orion
RoboCop was
Studios.
certainly one of those pictures.
I'm the production designer, and my job was to sort of give a look to the picture and keep what I always feel is to keep a cohesive look to the picture. There was a constant in design, very brutal, cold architecture. You'll see there's a constant line of concrete wherever we go. That's just boring but linear and kind of visually interesting and structural to me. It's clean, so there's no information that you don't want to see.
Let's say you're shooting people at the base of a hill and you want to put a castle on that hill. Well, you could build one, right? You get a prop and put a lot of money into it. Or you could hire a very good matte painter, a man who could take a piece of glass and then paint at the top of the glass that castle. And then you would actually put the frame of glass in front of the camera and shoot your live action. Rocco Giaffri, who did the matte paintings for RoboCop, had a different technique. He didn't like to use glass, and he used masonry boards, and he would paint right on those, mainly because he was always dropping the glass and breaking the glass mats.
So a matte shot, in the traditional sense, the oldest way to do it, is a controlled double exposure where you shoot the live action, you're blacking out part of the frame. Black represents a lack of exposure. You go back in the darkroom, rewind that film, and reload that on a pedestal-mounted locked-off camera that's pointing at an artwork easel. And that artwork easel contains your matte painting, which is black now in the complementary portion of the frame, and it fits together like two pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. And it takes a certain number of tests, usually about 4 to 6 camera tests before you get your painting to blend properly with the live action. In a situation with an architectural matte painting, you usually try and find areas that you'll be able to hide your blend in, and you go along with the architectural lines as best as possible. I'd rather cut into the set and paint a portion of that back in, because more often people are looking for a matte line on the outside perimeters of the set piece, not within the set itself. They were going to be shooting in Dallas, Texas, and they wanted it to look like Detroit in the near future.
What do you mean Dallas?
The production designer, and John Davison and Paul
Dallas,
had singled out the City Hall in Dallas, and they wanted that to be the base of an 80-story skyscraper for their OCP building. And so
Dallas City Hall was OCP?
Looking kind of like a big arrow that was stabbed into the ground. There's a wide shot of Delta City when RoboCop's car is driving away from camera, and we actually shot across the bridge crossing an area there, and we matted into the existing cityscape, the OCP building, and other futuristic structures. John Davison specifically singled out his favorite shots in Forbidden Planet. He wanted the thing, especially the down angles, to just plunge infinitely, and just have this incredible depth. I believe there are only
Dallas?
2 matte paintings in RoboCop that aren't done completely in camera on the original negative, and those are the elevator shots, because we needed to reduce the interior of the Plaza Americas to make it smaller and fit within that gigantic 80-story interior look. So those were optical reductions.
Optical reduction is when you take something of previously shot footage and actually reduce it in size to usually put it into something like a matte painting.
I'm responsible for the fall at the end of the film where Dick Jones is falling toward the street. Dick Jones is an animation puppet, a 2-foot-tall human animation stop-motion puppet in that shot. With a human being, you don't want to have him standing at attention with his arms at his sides. You want something that's going to be more in keeping with what he's actually going to be doing in the scene. And in the case of Ronnie Cox falling, he was falling spread-eagled and kicking on the way down, so I had his arms out to the side, and a slight crouch on him is how the sculpture was done over the top of the armature with plasticine clay. And that finished clay sculpture, you'll make a plaster mold. The clay is thrown away, and the armature is taken back down to bare bones metal again. That empty armature is placed inside this mold that's been cleaned out and scrubbed, and those 2 halves are again put back together. The foam will be injected into the mold when the 2 halves are joined together with the armature inside of that, and that in turn is baked like a cake in an oven at 350 degrees for a number of hours until the moisture is evacuated from the foam rubber mixture, and the thing is allowed to cool down. You pull the two mold halves apart, you end up with a rubber puppet, a very nice soft foam rubber puppet that's a likeness from the clay sculpture that you did, and then it's up to you to clean that up, paint the thing, put in some eyeballs, and dress it up in the three-piece suit. This is just a typical example of an old-fashioned stop-motion puppet. It's either hinge joints in some places or ball and socket joints. I'm just going to crank this open so you can get a look at typically what a ball joint looks like here for stop motion.
Please put down your weapon.
Ed
You have
209.
20 seconds.
Oh, Ed 209 I'm curious about.
Since RoboCop was effectively a man in a suit, Ed 209 could not be in any way a man in a suit. So that's one of the reasons we chose to offset the hips or do things that would be clearly impossible for a person to fit in that. That's why his hips are so far apart. It's one of the reasons that there's rails. The joints don't have a standard, knee joint. They've actually got a linear rail kind of a system that's, again, one step further away from a person in a suit.
I felt that they knew so much more about it, and they came with the proposals. Then when they came with proposals,
The
I
director.
could easily say, okay, but then do this. If we do it this way, then let's make this strange thing they had built, which is a gray area. Let's make that the eyes, the whole eyes. These are the eyes. There's hundreds of eyes. Basically, whatever it is, they can see through that, not by a little camera on the top of his head.
For the inspiration for Ed 209, we drew upon kind of a number of different areas, tried to draw something in the natural world. So killer whales were something that had a pretty menacing kind of a countenance. Everything's kind of an excuse. There's a big air intake and it looks a lot like a mouth. And there's this big dome that you can't really see where the eyes are. The idea there was that this would be maybe like an anti-laser surface. This is kind of the maquette stage, and it really is pretty instrumental. The last round of design until you blow this thing up to full scale. This is like basically it's blue foam. It's house insulation foam. You take that. It's cheap and stuff, and you can mix with my favorite toothpicks and soda straws. You kind of build a little version of the robot that you can talk about. The leg, upper leg would be here. It could pivot, and then also in order to take a step, the guy could actually shoot his leg forward, and then kind of as he's walking forward, do this. So that was pretty critical. You could see through it. There were lots of moving parts. There was a big screw that would be responsible for moving the leg up and down. And then like on the back here, a little bit of a plate, the screw access. And we figured since we're going to have a screw that's in there turning, we might as well put a detail on there. So I modeled the end of the screw to look like one of the axles you see on a railroad car. So as the guy's actually moving, you see these little things spinning.
The full-scale Ed 209 was a design that Craig had come up with, working with Paul Verhoeven and myself, and trying to get something that Paul was happy with as a character, and then it's just for RoboCop.
The crew that we were building at this time, with Pete Ronzani, Neil Breitbart, and Paolo Lucchesi, my girlfriend at the time, we pretty much built that thing together. And it was hell, but it was one of those experiences you come through, and at the end of the day, it's something we always remember. Later on, we became married, and so I guess it didn't really split us apart. All the forms were built up out of wood. We used a lot of plywood, masonite, and just fur, and actually kind of built up patterns and stuff bit by bit. We used a lot of plastic forming techniques and fiberglass techniques. And seeing how it was basically the middle of summer in San Rafael, we were pretty much in hell, up to our ears in fiberglass, and wearing these suits because you have to wear these protective suits and respirators and everything else while it's just blistering hot. It's a pretty tough portion there. One of the keys with movie props is they've got to be pretty flexible. You have to be able to put this thing together and take it apart in relatively short order. And actually, that's one of the things I'm pretty proud about, was the model was held together with bungee cords, snaps, and different techniques. So basically, two people could take the thing apart. We were pretty much left alone. In fact, for the full-scale prop, I don't think Paul saw it at all until it was delivered, in Dallas. That was pretty cool. I felt pretty trusted. Phil Tippett would check in on us on a periodic basis, come over and see what we're doing, and just kind of roll his eyes at the mess we were making and stuff. Our hearts were in it so much that compensation even wasn't necessarily important. Just contributing to this whole kind of process was really the motivation. The full-scale prop was essentially just that, a prop. It was capable of being posed. The head could be swiveled, from side to side. The arms were able to be pivoted. We could rotate them down or rotate them up. But it was really the kind of thing that had very, very limited motion. Because of the size of the big guy, his head was so big that even though we made this pretty reinforced fiberglass mold, it still sagged a little bit. So when you see the big one compared to the miniature version is built exactly off the pattern for the big one. But when we molded the big one, it squished just a little bit. So the big guy's head's just a little bit fatter than the miniature version. And actually, it's one of those things that always bugged me when I saw it in the film, because I recognized they were a little different. But what are you going to do?
Phil Tippett is the man on RoboCop who actually animated the stop motion puppets for Ed 209.
This is the stop motion miniature of the Ed 209 puppet that has an articulated stop motion a skeleton in it, or armature in it, and this is actually part of it's actually visible here. And you can see this lead screw mechanism that was part of the design that Craig Hayes had come up with.
Then they made a number of miniature puppets that were articulated and had little skeletons inside of them of metal so you could pose them, and then this was done through stop motion animation.
Every little aspect of this particular character has got an armatured jointed part